Coming back to Los Angeles, whether it's to visit or to live, has been for many, many years for me a sense of a soul base, particularly now. This is the city that has given me my career. I gave birth to my daughter in this town. I've had so much personal history and so much professional history as well. And when I announced that I was running for president, I wanted to do it here for that same reason. In this last period of my professional life that I lived here, it was here at the Sorbonne. And so many of you are people that I know and have known for years. There has always been a sense for me that I was seen and heard in Los Angeles because I think like so many people here think. And you don't actually, when you're here, think you're wacky. You just think like everybody else you know. When I announced that I was running for president, it was the culmination of a long process for me in my life. Many of you know that in 1997, I wrote a book called Healing the Soul of America. My first book, thank you. My first book, A Return to Love, had come out in 1992. Then I wrote A Woman's Worth, I wrote Illuminata, but I wanted to write a book about America. And at the time, I think a lot of people didn't particularly appreciate that that's what I was writing about. Because at that time, a lot of people in the more spiritual communities didn't want to have anything to do with politics. And for many people, that is true today. But at the same time, a lot has changed. I never regretted that I wrote the book, however. And the time would come years later when people would ask how it was that I was so seemingly prescient in that book, that I said things that in fact came to pass. And the reason it seemed like I was prescient was because as a metaphysician, any of us know that we are trained to look at events on the level of cause. And we know if the cause is there, then the effects will ultimately be there as well. So during the 1990s, everybody was going around saying how good everything was. But I was going around saying, well, doesn't that depend on what neighborhood you live in? Doesn't that depend on what part of the world you live in? Because it's kind of like if you have stage 1 cancer. The doctor doesn't say, oh, it's only stage 1, let's not even think about it. And the doctor certainly doesn't say, it's only stage 1, it would be so negative to talk about it. Cancer is not something about which you can say, don't talk about it because it'll expand. Cancer is one of those things, if you don't focus on it, is what can make it expand. And that's true about a lot of things in life. There's nothing holy about complacency. And as we've said so many times, there's nothing negative about yelling fire if, in fact, the house is burning down. So in 1997, I saw things that it didn't take somebody who was psychic to see. It was all around us if you wanted to see it. And that was already the encroaching income inequality. Racial injustice is not like it just happened. Mass incarceration was already rearing its ugly head. I was already talking about reparations for slavery at the end of the 90s. Why? Because what we talk about in the higher consciousness community, in the issues of faith, one of the things we realize is that you can't have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. So whether it's Catholics going to confession or Jews on the day of Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year, where you admit your sins, or whether it's in an AA meeting, where you know you have to admit the exact nature of your character defects, and you have to take a fearless moral inventory. All that a nation is a collection of people. So the same psychological and emotional and even spiritual processes that prevail within the journey of an individual prevail within the journey of a nation. And so if you're going to say to an individual, what do you have to clean up? Because you're not going to have the future you want until you're willing to clean up the past. Then you also say that to a nation. What is the future that you want? And in order to have that future, what are the things you have to clean up from the past? So I was talking about these things that were always important to me. And because early in my career, the AIDS crisis emerged right at the time that I first started lecturing here. So when we started the Centers for Living, Project Angel Food, for me, not only in my own personal life, but even in my professional life, even as someone talking about the Course in Miracles, I never saw anything that we were doing as separate from human suffering and the issue of human suffering. Many of you have been in this room. People get up and they talk about the most extraordinary things. People suffer. That's the whole point of everything, is the issue of addressing human suffering. That's what this is all about. To say that the purpose of our lives is to love, which it is the same thing as saying that the purpose of our lives is to ameliorate human suffering. There's a purpose to all this. And there is no spiritual or religious journey, path, or tradition that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. So from the beginning, for me, starting when I was a young person, like when I was in college, we read Ram Dass and Alan Watts in the morning, and we went to an Vietnam anti-war protest in the afternoon. There wasn't any separation between the two. That's why when some young man said to me a few years ago, "Miss Williamson, you're just an aging hippie, and your generation, all you ever did, you were just sex, drugs, and rock and roll." And I remember responding to him, "That was just part of the day." I said, "The rest of the day, we stopped a war. What have you done, young man?" So that combination of internal and external, thank you so much. So that combination of internal and external activism was always the sweet spot for me, was always the comfort zone for me. And any time that we were doing our Course in Miracles work, we were also addressing, we were never separated from the issues of the sufferer who was right in front of us. Sometimes, whether it had to do with something like AIDS or whether it had to do with a larger issue like something that had to do with an overseas event, something that was happening that had political overtones, it didn't matter because those categories themselves are just words. Now, as you know, I ran for Congress a few years ago, and so many of you were so wonderful to me when I went through that. And having run for Congress, I thought at the end of that, well, that was that. I read a book by a man named Ray Dalio called Principles, an excellent book, and he said, if you're going to live a meaningful life, you're going to take some risks, and if you take some risks, you're going to fail sometimes. He said something very interesting. He said, but if you fail, fail well. So I liked to think that after the congressional race, I failed well, and people were very kind to me and very compassionate when I was running, and very kind to me and very compassionate when that race was over as well and life went on. And when people asked me, do you think you'd do that again? It was definitely no. I didn't see that at all. I felt that whatever itch I had had to scratch, I had scratched it. That door was not going to open any further, but I certainly had a life that goes beyond that and a career that goes beyond that, and life went on. But for me, as for, I think, millions of people, Donald Trump becoming president of the United States changed everything. And for me, as for millions of people, and I'm sure many, many, if not to some extent everyone in this room, the yearning of our heart since the election of Donald Trump has been, what could I possibly do to help? What could I possibly do to make a difference? And I've sat with that in my heart no differently than anyone else has. And when I processed the idea of running for president, when the idea came to me and I lived with it and I talked to so many people that I trust, so many people, personal friends, professional colleagues, I didn't during that year and a half think, oh, that will be fun. I've been mocked in the press, I've been demeaned in the press, I've been humiliated in the press, I've been lied about in the press. I've been through all of that. And it's not fun. And I knew that that would inevitably follow my decision to run for president. But it was interesting to me that of all the people I spoke to, very serious people who are my friends and very serious people who are my professional colleagues as well, when I was talking about running, it struck me that regardless what the responses that I got from people, no one laughed. And no one laughed because this isn't funny. And I announced here, thank you so much, just as I announced here in January that I would be doing this, I feel like in being with you here tonight, and particularly in asking for your support, and you're being so kind to give me your support, I want you to know what kind of journey it has been. Politics is two different universes. There's the dog and pony show, and then there's what actually happens when you're, as Martin Luther King would say, talking about things that matter. So the dog and pony show is what they say on the TV pundits have to say. The dog and pony show has to do with who's where in the polls today. The dog and pony show has to do with who has raised what money. The dog and pony show has to do with what the political media industrial establishment has to say. That's the dog and pony show. And then there's another, almost like a parallel universe. And in that other universe, a candidate is talking to voters. And you know, one of the things that you in California, it's so interesting. People in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada know how important they are. They know how important they are. They know that the decision they make will determine how this thing unfolds. So they have a little bit of low-grade smirk on their face about what MSNBC or CNN or Fox or any of them has to say, because they know the power is in their hands. And I want to say to you Californians, this is so interesting. I know most of you are aware intellectually, but I don't get that Californians have necessarily psychologically and emotionally taken this in yet. Because early voting now begins in California on February 3rd. Your historical memory is, well, by the time it gets to California, it won't even matter what we have to say. That is no longer true. You get to start voting. You get to start voting on February 3rd, which is next year, which is the same day Iowa will vote. So you are, I know in every other area, you're very clear, you're the most important people in the world, but you thought you weren't when it comes to politics. Well, guess what? When it comes to the US presidential election, it's on you, California. So it's going to be interesting when I start seeing on the face of Californians what I already see on the face of people in Nevada and South Carolina and New Hampshire and what did I not mention? Iowa. Because it's, did I miss one? Because it's very, very profound when you realize the power that you hold in your hands. Now, there are, what, 20, however many people running at this point. And they're all great people. I've met all of them. I haven't met John Delaney yet. I've been in the same room, but I haven't met him. What lovely people, great people. I don't feel I'm running against anyone. I feel I'm running with everyone. And I feel it's your civic responsibility to listen to as many of the candidates as you can. Everybody comes with their ideas. On some issues, all of the Democratic candidates are very aligned. On some issues, just make sure it's a Democrat, we'll be fine. But on other issues, it's not that simple at all. There are some real differences. And so I am grateful everywhere I go, and particularly here tonight, simply because this is home for me, to tell you how I see my candidacy, my campaign, and my hopes for America. I'm not prosecuting a case against Donald Trump. I'm prosecuting a case against the system that created him. Donald Trump is an opportunistic infection. He could never have gotten hold of us had there not been a weakened societal immune system. And ladies and gentlemen, that does mean us. I think something that has been part of the awakening of the American people is that this is what happens when you don't take care of your democracy. You don't take care of your health, you can't really be that surprised when you lose your health. You don't take care of your marriage, you can't really be that surprised if you lose your marriage. If you don't take care of your business, can you really be that surprised you lose your business? We have abdicated too much of our political power over the last few decades. We conspired in our own disempowerment. We conspired in this very, very unhealthy and dysfunctional way by which politics has become a spectator sport. And the same politicians who complain about it have conspired to make it true. The founders did not leave the power in the hands of political parties. The founders did not leave power in the hands of a political class. The founders left power in the hands of the people. But when you have power, you have power. Power does not just give you rights. Power gives you responsibilities. And we have often concentrated on my rights, but I think too often we have concentrated on my responsibilities. Too often we either don't remember the history of this country, or in too many cases we never even learned it. There are 11 states in this country that do not even require half a year of American history, American civics, and American government, and you better believe that's a large part of why we are where we are. If you don't even know, if you don't learn as a child what the Bill of Rights is, you don't know as an adult to be absolutely horrified when it's under attack. You don't know. You didn't learn as a child what freedom of the press means and why. You didn't learn as a child what freedom of religion means and why. You didn't learn as a child what freedom of assembly means and why. You know, part of the problem, a big part of the problem, is we've lost our emotional and psychological connection to the principles on which we stand. The Declaration of Independence is America's mission statement, and those principles in that document are extraordinary. When the founders told Thomas Jefferson, "You're going to have to write it, Thomas," Jefferson said to John Adams, "Why do I have to write it?" And he said, "Because you're the one who can write." And this is what that document says. You know, in the Jewish religion, it says every generation must discover God for itself. And every generation of Americans must rebond with these principles. This is why John Adams, second president of the United States, said that he hoped every year on July 4th that we would revisit our first principles. Because if they are only inscribed on marble walls somewhere, and if they are only written on parchment, and it's behind glass, and when our children are in the 8th grade, we send them on a trip to Washington so we can say, oh, well, she needed to see the Declaration of Independence. If that's all it is, then we lose our emotional connection, and they lose their moral force. Principles that are not alive in our hearts are deadened. And when that happens, when a generation loses its personal connection to those principles, what happens is what has happened. We become easy to play. We become easy to fool. We become easy to distract. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the 11th hour. It's not midnight yet, but we need to wake up, and we need to wake up fast. Now, children, let's revisit those first principles, right? Okay, we all know what they are. But we need an integrative politics. We need to hear these things and think about these things beyond just this discombobulated set of facts, this discombobulated set of data. We're human beings, we're multidimensional beings. So the history of a nation is the history of people. It's a grand story. And it says in the Declaration of Independence, number 1, all men are created equal. And number 2, God gave all men unalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. Number 3, it says that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And number 4, if that government does not do so, if that government does not secure happiness and security for its people, it is the right of the people to alter it and to abolish it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not saying let's abolish it, but we sure as heck need to alter it, and alter it quickly. Now, we all know the story of the United States. We all know that the men who signed the Declaration of Independence, we all know that by doing so, they were risking their lives, because if the British had won the war, they would have all been executed as traitors. We all know that they showed extraordinary courage in signing it. We all know that the document itself is so historical. We all know that the document itself was repudiating a system of social order that had been in place for centuries, of monarchy, of aristocracy. The idea that a few people had the power, the king had the power to rule over, the queen had the power to rule over, and then they had a few rich friends, the aristocracy. And the aristocracy was entitled. These few people in the upper classes were entitled to the land, and they were entitled to education, and they were entitled to wealth, and they were entitled to create wealth, and no one else was. No one else was considered equal in station. No one else could spread their wings. No one else could soar. No one else could self-actualize. No one else could manifest their dreams on a material level. Only those upper classes could do that. And when we were children, we learned, I remember, you learn it as a kid, but you don't know really. I remember as a child learning about the divine right of kings. The idea was that God had given power to the king to lord over. So when these men signed the Declaration of Independence and said, God created all men. Notice, it doesn't say all men are equal. It says all men are created equal. And it says God gave all men unalienable rights. So this is more than a political document. This is a document that speaks to the core of what human beings should have the right to be, should have the space to be, and the possibility in which all people should be able to dwell. It was extraordinary. It was radical. It was radical in 1776, and it's radical today. 41 of them, however, were slave owners. So that dichotomy has been with us from the beginning. This dichotomy, this polarity, this weird tension between the fact that on the one hand, we are the country in the world founded on the most aspirational, enlightened, and illumined principle of human possibility. This is what we're talking about, human possibility, anywhere at any time. And it has shown lights immeasurable on this planet. But at the same time, from the very beginning, from the fact that even signers of the Declaration of Independence owned slaves, we have also been at times the most violent perpetrators of transgression against the principles on which we purport to stand. That's our characterological story. This is a story for every generation of Americans to grapple with, because every generation writes its chapter in this ongoing novel, as it were. So, over time, we do tend to self-correct. We do tend to get it right over time. There was slavery, but then there was abolition. There was the suppression of women, and then there was the suffragette movement, and there have been and continue to be waves of feminism. There was institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, and then there was the civil rights movement. There was the denial of the right to marry to gay people, and then there was the marriage equality movement. There was genocide and cultural annihilation of Native Americans, and then there was improvement and a sense of struggle and a sense of repair that is going on as we speak. So every generation from the beginning, and including ours, has contained within it both forces, has contained within it both those whose hearts were ablaze with the possibilities of full self-actualization for anyone, that there should not be any material cap on people's dreams, that there should not be any material circumstances that make it impossible for a person to soar and become everything that they wish to be. There are those of us whose hearts are alive with that. There have always been those of us in every generation whose hearts are ablaze with that. But there have also been in every generation, and we were naive to ever think they wouldn't be, as my father used to tell us, the bastards are always at the door. It was naive of us to think that they weren't alive, they weren't around, they weren't funded, and they weren't active in our generation just like in every other. And it is on us that we were so distracted or so naive or so whatever we were that we just assumed somebody else would handle it. Now, those forces today don't represent an evil institution such as slavery. They don't represent an evil institution such as the suppression of women or segregation. But it is an amoral mindset. It is an amoral mindset which proffers itself as good economic theory. It began in the 1980s. It began in the 1980s with an economic theory called trickle-down economics. And it was the idea that if the US corporation, which affects all of our lives, if the US corporation only has one responsibility, and that is its fiduciary responsibility to its stakeholders, to its stockholders, without any sense of moral or ethical obligation to any other stakeholders, such as workers, community, environment, and to some extent, we're all stakeholders in what happens in corporate America, then this was sold to us as a good thing. Because what we were told was that this stockholder class would become so rich, and then they would create jobs, and all the money would trickle down, and it would lift all boats. That was back in 1980, full bore in the 1980s. And I think that after 40 years, we can say the jury's in. This trickle-down economic theory has not lifted all boats. It has left millions of people without even life vests. And it has created the largest income inequality since 1929. And it has left us in a place where 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now, this economic theory that became so popular in the 1980s, things continued to happen that created more and more of a toxic brew, including the fact that by the 1990s, so much of that corporate money, which represented that mentality, began to have an explosive and undue influence on public policy. And then by the time Citizens United Supreme Court decision came around giving unlimited power, by this point, ladies and gentlemen, we're in trouble. Because the United States government has become little more than a system of legalized bribery. And we now live in a situation where that economic theory, an amoral economic theory has both corrupted the United States government and it has hijacked America's value system. This is dangerous, and it is time. Just like when slavery was in this country, it wasn't the political establishment that rose up and said, let's end slavery. No, 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 no. First, it was the early evangelicals and the Quakers, the abolitionist movement. The people stepped in. That's how we got to the point where slavery was abolished. The political establishment did not wake up and say, let's all give women the right to vote. Why don't we? No, 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 no. With the women's suffragette movement, it was because the people stepped in. And the political establishment didn't wake up one day and say, oh, let's get rid of segregation, shall we? That's not what happened. With the civil rights movement, with the Baptist preacher and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the people stepped in. Ladies and gentlemen, can we be real? The political establishment is not going to correct itself. It created this mess. The political establishment represents a political status quo in America. The status quo seeks to perpetuate itself. All that the political status quo is offering is incremental change. All that the political establishment is offering is an amelioration of the suffering that we are going through, or that many people are going through as a consequence of this situation, but it will not challenge the underlying forces that make all the suffering inevitable because it's in bed with them. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is going to change, it will be just as it has always been in American history, because the people step in. So, of course, they say, you're not qualified to do what we do. Damn right. The issue is not... The issue is not, you should not be president because you don't know how Washington works. It's the opposite. I should be president because I do know how Washington works. We all know what's going on there. It is the right of the people to alter this. It is the right of the people to alter this. We should remember, and I'm running as a Democrat and as a proud Democrat. You know, when I ran for Congress, I ran as an independent. And I ran as an independent very naively, I might add. But I felt it was a principled thing to do because I do feel that there has been an unholy alliance. You know, George Washington warned us against political parties. Political parties are not mentioned in the United States Constitution. And George Washington warned us about them in his farewell address, saying that they could create factions of men and that men would be more I don't know what he thought the women were doing all that, but they were. And men would be more concerned about the faction than about the country. However, let me just say this. First of all, when I was growing up, the Democratic Party was everything that we wanted to be, and I believe can be again. But even more than that, I see issues with the political parties. They're issues. They're like two broken legs and two broken arms. But Donald Trump is like a bullet near the heart. We'll get to the political party issue later. Right now, I would not do anything to take even 10 votes away from the Democrat in 2020, and I hope you won't either. But we should not be naive about what's going on here. This president is not just a politician. This president is a phenomenon. And I do not believe that an insider politics game will defeat him. An insider politics game is like taking a knife to a gunfight when it comes to this president. The political establishment does not have any particular psychological or emotional perspicacity. It doesn't see beneath the waterline into what's going on inside people. That's why it was so gobsmacked by Bernie in the Democrats, and why the Republicans were so gobsmacked by Donald Trump. Because what was going on inside people doesn't register in that kind of mindset. The traditional political mindset is a product of 20th century thinking at its worst. It is all external. It is all superficial. It is all on the level of effect. It does not address the level of cause. It doesn't address the level of cause, so it doesn't see things coming. And because it doesn't address the level of cause, it also does not know how to fundamentally repair things. It's very allopathic. Traditional political establishment is like allopathic medicine. You don't necessarily prevent disease, and then when disease arrives, you just hope that some external remedy will suppress or eradicate the symptom. We need a holistic, integrated politics where we understand that where people are desperate, bad things are always going to happen. And just like when there are desperate people, we should see desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people become a petri dish out of which societal dysfunction is almost inevitable. But not only that, when people are desperate and symptoms have arisen, the last thing you do is punish people more. The last thing you do is bomb them or put them in prison is the only problem-solving modality that you have. Ladies and gentlemen, you make me President of the United States, and core to all public and international policy will be something decidedly and distinctly 21st century. And to those of you, and this is amazing to me, there are millions of people in this country who will be voting for president next year, who were not even born in the 20th century. The burdens of old mindset, 20th century, they don't even have, it's not even in their psyche. They weren't even born then. And we should drop it too. And if we do, then we align ourselves with the evolutionary imperative of the 21st century, just like our founders were aligning themselves with a new evolutionary imperative that all men are created equal. And we need a new evolutionary imperative for the 21st century, and that is the realization we are on this earth to love each other. We are on this earth to love each other. That's all that's going on here. Now, some people would say that's very naive. They say, what's a politics of love? I'll tell you what a politics of love. You see a hungry child, you feed them. You see a poor person struggling, you help them. You see a child that needs to be educated, you educate them. You see somebody who just needs some help here, you help them. And you seek conflict and you seek to wage peace. There are people who would say, what a naive view that is. What naive view that is to think that that could be core to our policies. I tell you what's naive is to think we will survive another 100 years on this planet if we do not. And now let's drill deep into what they're really saying when they say that's naive, when they say it's wacky, when they say it's silly. What they're really saying is there are no corporate profits to be made there. Now, actually, you know, when I was a child, politicians used to always talk about peace and prosperity. That was all you heard about. Peace and prosperity, peace and prosperity. And then several years ago, I noticed I don't hear them talking about peace and prosperity anymore. And then my next thought was, I guess because it's kind of a cliche. And then it was like a brick to my forehead. I thought, that's not why they don't talk about it. They don't talk about it because it's not the goal anymore. Peace and prosperity? Is peace our goal? You know, like I said, the same principles that apply to a person apply to a nation. You got to claim what you want. What do we want? Do you ever even hear any of them talking about what we need to do to have peace on the planet in 50 years? We don't even go there. Tulsi Gabbard and I are the only one who even touch it. What does that say to you? What do we have to do if we want peace on the planet? Ooh, that's a radical concept. Right now, let's be adults here. I've always felt that those of us who are part of a deeper exploration of self, we should be the last people standing on the sidelines when it comes to great social, economic, and political issues. We should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. Because if you know what changes one life, you're the one who has a clue as to what changed the world. So you're the one who knows if you want something, you have to ask, what do I want? And you claim it for your vision, and then that guides you to what it will take in order to make it happen. So you say, okay, I want a peaceful planet. Imagine, and peace, to even imagine it, we want a peaceful planet in the 21st century. So how are we going to do that? So then you say, well, I don't know, what are you doing now? You go, well, we spend $750 billion a year on preparing for military, you know, on the military to prepare for war. And then you go, well, what would it take to prepare for peace? Because we want to have peace. If this is your new goal, you want peace. Because right now, we just $750 billion a year on the military. And so what, we're going to just back up into peace? Now apply holistic thinking to this. Sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. War is the absence of peace. Peace isn't the absence of war. You don't just take medicine, you cultivate your health. And you can't just prepare for war, you have to cultivate peace. You have to wage peace. How do you wage peace? Well, there are ways to do it. There are people who are called the peace builders. And the skills of peace building are every bit as sophisticated as are the skills of military action. Obviously, we need a strong military. I'm certainly not disagreeing with that. I don't think any of us would. But I look at the military like you look at a surgeon. You know, if you're going to have surgery, you need to have the best. But every sane person knows you try to avoid surgery if possible. So what does it take to build peace? Well, that's under the aegis of the State Department. So your Defense Department gets $750 billion. Your State Department gets $40 billion. And within that, there is $17 billion that's given to the USAID, which is humanitarian assistance around the world. And then less than $1 billion is given to America's peace-building agencies. Peace-building is number one. This isn't going to shock anyone. Number two, expand economic opportunities for women. Number two, expand educational opportunities for children. Number three, reduce violence against women. And number four, ameliorate unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. Because desperate people should be seen as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people become more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, such as a terrorist organization, and also desperate people, such as people in Guatemala, in Honduras, in El Salvador, because of their desperation, do things like walking across deserts. Walking across deserts with small children. So great is the horror and the violence of their home. And ladies and gentlemen, can we just stop and think about this for a moment? You know, there were Jews who were on boats that were turned away, who tried to escape Germany and were sent back. And this is seen as a moment of national shame. We look back at the Japanese internment camps and we look at this as a time of shame. This is why in 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, whereby we actually gave to every surviving prisoner from the Japanese internment camps between $20,000 and $22,000. What is happening today at the border? Even today as we speak, while the president is seeking to basically get rid of asylum. Asylum is not a crime. Seeking asylum is a statutory right. All four of my grandparents came through Ellis Island seeking asylum after oppression in Russia and Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, what is happening today, what is happening with immigrants at our border, what is happening so much with the agenda of this president will one day be seen as an aberration. It will one day be seen as a very unfortunate chapter in American history. It will one day be seen as a chapter of shame. That is what they will say later. What we need to do now is just make sure we end the chapter. But like I said, just defeating Donald Trump's not going to do it. That's just treating the symptom. We have to treat the cause. We have to look at the fact that the military-industrial complex, the fact that corporate profits for defense contractors does more to guide our national security agenda than does the actual proactive waging of peace. That will change in a Williamson administration. There will be a U.S. Department of Peace, and the peace builders will have a place at the table, and we will recognize and we will recognize that there are huge amounts of human suffering on this planet, and wherever there are large groups of suffering people, it is government's job to address it. It is government's job to address it. It is government's job to unleash the spirit of its people. It is government's job to uncap our dreams, not thwart our dreams. And yet there are millions of American children who go to school every single day. In class, that's right. Hungry. She's absolutely right. There are children, there are 43 million food insecure people in the United States, 13 million hungry children. There are elementary school teachers in this country who every single day have a child say to them, "Do you have any food I could eat?" We have millions of American children in this country, the richest country in the world, who go to school in classrooms that do not even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child can't learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. And many of these children go to school in what's called America's domestic war zones, where the violence in their homes, their families, their communities is so great that psychologists say that the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq is no worse than the PTSD of these children. We should be rescuing them. No different than that if they were the victims of a natural disaster. This is a huge humanitarian emergency. Just as the children at the border are a screaming emergency, these other children are a silent emergency. But what has the traditional political establishment done about these kids? Just normalizes their despair. Don't get much of a mention, aren't considered an issue. And why is that? And why is that? The reason is because they're not old enough to work. So there's no financial leverage there. How can they possibly compete with the cloud of all the corporate money that floods Washington? And they're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. I name them, and when I am president, I will help them. We are the only advanced democracy that bases our educational funding primarily on property taxes. So if a child is born in an advantaged neighborhood, you have a very good chance of a very good public education in the United States. But for children who are not in financially advantaged neighborhoods, so that needs to change. Right now, there are states who cannot do better. There are other states that have the money to do better and do not choose to do better. We need to pass a federal mandate that and I will not be happy until every child in America goes to a school that is a palace of learning, a palace of culture, and a palace of the arts. And I don't care how weird it came out. I know it came out a little weird when I said I was going to call the Prime Minister of New Zealand. But like everything else I said, beyond the weird, and by the way, what is a mid-Atlantic accent? I don't even know what that means. But the substance of what I said, I meant it that night, and I mean it now. There should be no country in the world that has a better situation for a child to grow up in than does the United States. Thank you. Now let's drill down a little deeper into why things are the way they are. Remember what I said about peace and prosperity? Remember when I said they stopped talking about peace and prosperity because that's not the goal? How, and as I've already said, peace isn't even the goal. I mean, it's just endless preparation for war. We have a war economy. 53 cents of every dollar is spent on military expenditures of some kind, jobs related. People say, oh, but it creates so many jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, more jobs are created by investment in healthcare, education, and infrastructure than are created by the military. We need to move from a military budget, from a war economy to a peace economy, just like we need to move from a dirty economy to a clean economy. But I want to talk a little bit about these children before we get out, because when I said before that prosperity was not the goal, what company succeeds that isn't constantly developing new products? That's what our children are. They're the new products that keep it going. So if you really want to have prosperity in your country, you don't neglect millions of your children. If you really want to have amazing prosperity 10 or 15 years from now, I'll tell you what you do. Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. We need a massive realignment of our investment in the direction of children 10 years old and younger. A massive realignment. That's why we need a United States Department of Children and Youth. We need wraparound services. We need communities. We need anti-bullying. We need violence prevention. We need mindfulness in the schools. We need anti-trauma. We need so many things. We need to make sure. I was at a school in South Carolina called the Governor's School of Math and Science, and it was simultaneously so inspiring and heartbreaking. On one hand, it's a public school. It was a palace of learning, art, culture, and food. But what's heartbreaking about it? Only 280 children. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what every school in America should be. And what we should have in this country, if you really want prosperity, you want to see American entrepreneurialism, you want to see American genius, you want to see American spirit and like, oh my God, we can do anything, I'll tell you where you find it. Go into any kindergarten in any neighborhood in the United States of America. Talk about entrepreneurialism. Okay, I got my Legos over here. I got my numbers over here. I got my blocks over here. Over here, I'm making a concoction. And you look at these kids, and you know what? We know this now. Neurologically, we know this in ways we didn't know it 50 years ago. Things that are going on in the brain of a child. The 21st century, that which will fuel us, that which will open the space to a period greater than we've ever been, and a period that is greater than we've ever been, which is also a light greater than we have ever shown to lead the nations, will not come from the air, from the wind, from the sun, any more than it will come from the ground, but it will not come from any of those places. It will come from the human brain and the human heart. And all public policy, both domestic policy and international policy, should be that. And we should have a president who gets that. We should have a president who gets that. How does this policy align with helping people thrive? Now, I'm a left-wing progressive Democrat, so of course I want the universal health care, and of course I want the minimum wage at 15 at least, and of course I want the free college, free state universities and colleges, and of course I want the removal of those hideous college loans. But it's not just that I want those things, it's why I want those things. Because I want a new social contract between the people of the United States and the government of the United States. That's what happened in 1776, a new contract between the people and their government. And the thing is, everything I'm saying is actually just going back to what we said in 1776. In 1776, we repudiated the notion that only a few people get to thrive. We repudiated that in 1776, and we need to repudiate it again. it turns out that the American Revolution, just like your relationship, just like your health, just like your business, it's ongoing. It's ongoing. You don't get to say, I meditated in 94, so I don't need to meditate now. I was really in shape in 2000, so I don't need to work out now. And you can't say, okay, we did this democracy thing in 1776, so that's handled. No, that which is not constantly given to the light is surrendered to the darkness. Everything that is not given to that which moves forward, that which is vital, that which is being born and reborn all the time, is busy dying. And we were very naive to think we could take something as extraordinary as democracy for granted. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need way more than just a better version than same old, same old. What this man represents is something much bigger than just political strategy. He has harnessed bigotry, racism, fear, homophobia, Islamophobia, and everything he's doing every day, it gets worse. The stuff he said today, the stuff that was, you know, it's odd. We don't know exactly what happened and what didn't happen this weekend. I think a lot more will be coming out in terms of the raids, happened, didn't happen. I think a lot of what happened is that mayors all across this country said, we're not going along with this, and we will not let our police go along with it. But this is very, very dangerous. And we need somebody who's not just qualified. I think I think the Democrats need to be careful. We must not have amnesia. Last time we had the most qualified candidate. Something bigger than that is going on here. And we raised more money than he did. Something bigger than that is going on here. There's only one thing that can defeat a phenomenon is another phenomenon. And that's and I have seen in my 35-year career, I have seen the miraculous transformation that occurs inside people when they get real, and they get deep, and they get honest, and they atone for their mistakes, and they make amends. That's why I feel so strongly about reparations. Clean it up, atone for your mistakes. Where does it still need to be cleaned up? It releases energy that would otherwise not be released. The issue of reparations is that not just economic, it is moral, it is spiritual, it is psychological and emotional force. We have to address the turbulence underneath, below the radar. And when we do that, ladies and gentlemen, just as things change in us, I've seen that in my own life. I've seen how deadened places within myself have come to new life. So many of us, not only people interested in these things from a religious perspective or spiritual perspective or psychotherapeutic perspective. It could be secular, it could be religious, it could be spiritual. We just know that when you take ethics seriously and character seriously and integrity seriously and love seriously and mercy seriously and justice seriously and rising to the occasion differently, you are not the same man or woman on the other side of that journey that you were before you began it. When you take that journey from the worst of yourself to the best of yourself, and we've talked before, we've all got wounds, but at a certain point in life, you decide whether or not to act from your wound. Nobody, no intelligent observer ever thought we didn't have racist, bigots, anti-Semites, homophobes, etc. in this country. Of course we had them. But we thought that at a certain point we had achieved a place where there was a consensus on the left and the right that we wouldn't be going past certain lines, that there were certain places that nobody would be able to go. They would not be given credence or megaphone on the left or on the right. And unfortunately now, largely due to social media and largely due to an amoral human being who is not above using those things and harnessing those things for his own political purposes, those levees have fallen. Now, Jared Kushner said that he said to his father-in-law, you know, there are a lot of angry people out there, and we could harness all that and make you president. You know what I say? There are a lot of really wonderful, dignified, decent people out there. We could harness all that and change the world. And that is the task before us. That is our mission. Just like Franklin Roosevelt said, our generation, he said, has a rendezvous with destiny. We did not expect to have a rendezvous with destiny. We sort of thought we were destiny. As it turns out, we do have a rendezvous with destiny. As it turns out, we are challenged. We are challenged as other generations have been challenged just as seriously. We don't have to rise up against slavery. We don't have to rise up against the oppression of women on the level of not giving women the right to vote. We don't have to rise up against segregation, although we do have to rise up against institutionalized white supremacy. And we have to rise up against a corporatist mentality that puts short-term profit maximization from huge multinational entities before the health and well-being of the American people, the people of the world, and the planet on which we live. You know, love is very fierce, and sometimes love says no. There's nothing holy about complacency, and there's nothing negative about yelling fire if, in fact, the house is burning down. And all of us know that love leads us sometimes, because we love each other, to say, stop right there. And that's what we have to do. If you're going to say no to an abusive partner, you must say no to abusive governmental action. And so it is our time. It is our time to stand up, just as others have before us. There are a lot more lovers here than haters, but the haters are strategized today, and they're active, and they have a leader who, something very dangerous is going on. And I don't think anybody needs me to tell you who Donald Trump is or what Donald Trump is about. That's not what this conversation is for me. What we must do is boost the societal immune system. What we must do is to realize that each and every one of us is an immune cell in the body politic. As I said when I began this evening, this opportunistic infection could never have gotten a hold of us had this societal immune system not become weakened. We were distracted, ladies and gentlemen. We were distracted. We took our eye off the ball. We forgot what citizenship means, but we remember now. And even though sometimes Americans are slow to wake up, when we do wake up, there's nothing like what we do when Americans are awake. And we are awakened now. And now we have to harness our awakening. We need to love with the same level of conviction that is now being displayed by those who hate, because conviction is a force multiplier. We need to be really serious now, ladies and gentlemen. No more time, no more grace period. Rehearsal is over. No more time, nothing like, oh, but I'm so traumatized by the whole thing. We don't have time for you to get over your trauma work before you show up for your country. The people who walked across that bridge at Selma, I assure you they were traumatized. They didn't know if they were going to take out the dogs. They didn't know if they were going to take out the hoses. They didn't know if they were going to take out the bullets, but they walked. And those women who marched for suffrage and then were thrown into jail because of it, and the conditions in the prison were so horrible that they went on a hunger strike, and the guards came in and put these metal contractions around their necks, and then to force them to eat. You think they weren't stressed and tense? You think they weren't anxious about the whole thing? You know, I heard Reverend Barber. I had the honor of being on a panel with Reverend Barber the other day, and he said something which I so feel sometimes, and I don't say it, but he said it when so many people were saying, oh, but this whole thing is so left-wing, so left-wing. He said, if this is left-wing, then democracy is left-wing. If this is left-wing, what do you mean it's radical? What we're talking about here is not radical any more than that love is radical. Democracy is radical. And to anybody who says, well, I just don't know, you know what Reverend Barber says? Oh, grow up. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the time for women to be little girls. This is not the time for men to be little boys. And we have too often, sometimes people, even in the higher consciousness community, have allowed a kind of infantilization. Oh, well, you know, I'm just not political. No, we're all political. All that political means is our collective behavior, and we are responsible. There is a law of cause and effect. Every cause has an effect. Our individual behavior has an effect, and our collective behavior has an effect. Someone has harnessed fear. We must now harness love. I am running for president because I believe nothing less than that will turn this ship around. Because I believe we must rise up now. This is bigger than, well, I'm going to vote for that person. No, this is so much bigger than that. It's that I am an American. That place has to come up in each and every one of us. We need to be brave. We need to be courageous. We need to be loving. We need to be reverential. We have to love the earth. We have to atone for what we've done to this earth. We have to love each other. We have to atone for what we've have done to each other. We have to love our great-great-grandchildren. We have to atone for how irresponsible we have been about them. And as we do that, it's amazing what will happen inside each and every one of us. And where we have been weak, we will find our strength. And where we have been cowardly, we will find our courage. And where we have been constricted in fear, we will be expanded in love. And we will go forth, and we will end this chapter in American history, and we will usher in something exciting, something new, something amazing, and future generations will look back at us and say, it's a mystery in history. Who would have thought it? This generation that seemed to not care about anyone but themselves, all of a sudden at the last minute woke up and remembered, I am not here alone. I am here with a purpose. I am here with each other. And we're going to love. And nobody's going to know. And they're going to write books about it. About it, and they're going to not quite know what happened. And as the opinion writer in the New York Times this week said, although he said some very interesting things, if you haven't read that article called The Meaning of Marianne Williamson, he said it would take the whole Course in Miracles to send her to the White House, and I went, well. And then another reporter said to me this week, you know, Ms. Williamson, the word about you is you're just the mirror image of Donald Trump. And I said, yeah, you might want to think about that. Thank you very much, everybody. I love you. Thank you.